Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Gray-la-Ville, Haute-Saône, France. A quiet Saturday in late October 2017, a 29-year-old woman, Alexia Duval, is reported missing after a routine morning run. There's no spectacle, no dramatic phone call, just a timeline that stops moving. Within hours, local gendarmes mark a search perimeter, volunteer teams sweep hedgerows and farm tracks, and the first critical questions are logged. Last confirmed sighting, expected route, clothing, keys, phone. Nothing turns up. 2 days later, a coordinated search unit working the wooded sector outside town reaches Bois de la Vaivre, near Esmoulins. Under low brush, they locate partially burned human remains concealed with branches. The area is sealed. Forensics photograph, map, and bag. Scene leadership orders a strict walkback, where entry points allow a vehicle to stop, how long someone could work in that cover without being seen, whether fresh tire impressions or footwear patterns survived overnight moisture. Early indicators suggest manual strangulation. Burning appears post-mortem, consistent with an attempt to obscure identity rather than the cause of death. No theatrics here, just method. Preserve, document, compare. Back in town, the disappearance has already become a national story. Crowds gather for a white March vigil. Candles, silence, posters. Family members flank the podium. The public face is grief. The investigative face is restraint. Detectives don't debate rumors. They build a clock. They reconstruct the morning with receipts, messages, and statements, pinning each to a minute. They request camera pulls from service roads feeding the forest. They check fuel transactions that match a short window when a car could have accessed the tree line, and they log which routes offer concealment on exit. The goal in Chapter 1 is simple. Fix the start time, fix the find location, and keep everything else controlled. For viewers used to American cases, note the jurisdiction. This is France, not a 911 culture. Procedures differ, but the logic is familiar. Secure the scene, isolate variables, and separate optics from data. In towns like this, murders don't just take a life, they tear the fabric of a community. People stop running, parents change routines, and investigators lean hard on what can't be talked into or out of existence. The physical record. Here's what matters at this stage. The missing person report is logged on October 28, 2017. The remains are found 2 days later in Bois de la Vaivre. The initial forensic read points to strangulation with burning as staging. No suspect is named in this chapter. No motive is speculated. We don't dramatize the forest, we diagram it. The next step is the timeline audit. If the run didn't happen as described, the clock will show it. If it did, the clock will still show something else. A gap, a detour, a drive that shouldn't exist. The forest outside Gray-la-Ville is quiet, but the record it keeps is mechanical. Line searches are reset at first light. Every step is logged. Search leaders mark a rectangle around the discovery point in Bois de la Vaivre, near Esmoulins, and convert it into a scene map. Origin, burn cone, branch placement, drag vectors. A senior technician handles photography, overhead, mid-range, macro, then switches to laser measurements so distances are not guessed later. Nothing is left to memory. Access matters first. The team plots where a vehicle could stop without being seen from the main road. Fire tracks and field cut-throughs are measured for tread width. Fresh impressions are sifted for dusting powder and cast if viable. Leaves and pine needles are deceptive, so they check soft margins where a tire might have kissed exposed soil. Footwear prints are flagged only when edges show compression, not just scuff. The goal is to learn how long someone could have worked here and how they got out. Next is the burn itself. The body has already been removed under a shroud with full documentation. Now the surface beneath is treated as the accelerant canvas. Investigators take soil cores from the center of the burn area and 3 concentric rings, capped and sealed for lab testing. If a common fuel was poured, residue can linger in soil granules longer than on bark. Depth of charring on nearby branches is measured. Shallow, irregular patterns are consistent with a short, concealment-focused fire, not a long-duration blaze. A quick fire leaves fewer clues, but not none. The medical examiner's preliminary read indicates asphyxial death by manual strangulation. Burning is assessed as post-mortem. That conclusion will be supported or challenged by lab work, not narration. Field agents therefore avoid over-talking it and collect what labs will need: swabs from branch ends used as cover, hair or textile fragments trapped in brush, micro-debris on the downhill side where gravity settles what the eye misses. Where woodpecker holes expose old dust, they scrape for transfer. Fibers can marry a scene to a living room later. Digital checks begin at the edge of the trees. Technicians run cell coverage tests along approach routes and at the dump site to understand whether a phone in this spot would ping a tower or go dark. They repeat the drive at the same hour, logging travel times and camera opportunities. Farm cameras in rural France aren't dense like city CCTV, so agents expand the net to include gas station forecourts, pharmacy fronts, and municipal lenses on traffic islands within a 10-kilometer radius. Any car seen twice near the forest in the critical window will be escalated. Back at command, the scene lead draws a work graph: vehicle access, fuel source, time on scene. All three have to be consistent with the same suspect pool and the same morning clock. A separate team runs weather. Overnight moisture can erase or soften prints. Wind direction can spread a light pour and muddy accelerant readouts. If the wind was steady, the burn cone will bias in one direction. If it shifts, they expect a messier pattern. The fire here is messy, but short. The branch cover is interesting. It is not random blowdown. The ends align in a quick weave. Investigators collect a sample of splinter tips for fracture analysis. If those twigs came from a nearby limb freshly snapped, the break surfaces may match. If they were carried in, there may be transfer, needle type, lichen type from another stand. This kind of work is slow, but it pays off when defense argues forest debris fell naturally. A matched fracture is hard to explain away. Community pressure is already high. The White March Vigil has drawn cameras. The team keeps that noise outside the tent. The workflow is the same in Gray-la-Ville as it would be in Minneapolis or Lyon. Secure, measure, sample, verify. The human line in the sand is the victim's name, Alexia Davol, 29, but the case will only move if the scene is allowed to speak without interruption. In places like this, murders don't just shake neighbors, they rearrange habits. Runners stay on main roads. Parents shorten routes. Investigators go back to basics. By the end of this phase, the board has 3 clean tasks. 1. Compare the burn pattern and soil residues to known fuel purchases in the days prior. Hardware stores, agricultural suppliers, service stations. 2. Test branch fragments and ground fibers against textiles recovered from the home and vehicle of anyone in the inner circle of contact. 3. Align drive time studies with the original missing person clock. If someone claimed to be in one place when they could not have been, the scene will call that out. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Before we advance, a human note. Scenes like this are clinical by design, but they represent a person who was known, loved, and expected home before lunch. Respect at the site is not sentiment, it is discipline. It prevents shortcuts that create errors, and errors cost cases. The next step is the clock. Investigators in Vesoul build a minute-by-minute model for the morning of October 28, 2017, and the 2 days that follow. The model isn't a story, it's a spreadsheet anchored to verifiable events: device activity, utilities pings, receipts, camera time codes, and statements. Every line gets a source tag. If a moment can't be sourced, it's marked as a gap, not a guess. They start inside the home. Power-on events from household devices confirm when lights and small appliances drew current. Router logs, where available, place which devices attempted to handshake and when. Phone records indicate wake-ups, alarms, and any outbound activity. If a runner actually left the house, there should be a window where the device stopped moving on Wi-Fi and transitioned, or where it was left behind on a counter. The team notes what the phone did and did not do, then locks that into the first 5 minutes of the morning. From there, they expand to neighborhood cameras. This is not a city grid, it's rural France. Agents request pulls from traffic islands, municipal intersections, service station forecourts, pharmacy fronts, and private exteriors that face trunk roads. Each file is hashed, then logged with start and end time. They run a route simulation at the same hour to test which cameras could have captured a jogger or a vehicle leaving the area. When a camera shows nothing, it still has value. It tells you where a subject did not pass. Vehicle movement becomes the next column. Agents look for the family car and any other vehicles tied to immediate contacts. License plate recognition isn't universal on these roads, so they use pattern matching: make, model class, color, visible damage, roof racks. When they find candidates, they check the same camera in the return direction later that morning. A car that goes out and doesn't come back in a reasonable window is flagged. A car that appears twice near Bois de la Vaivre within the critical period is escalated. Telecom is its own track. Investigators request cell site activity for key devices tied to the household and immediate circle. In rural coverage, towers hand off broadly, but timing still matters. If a phone that should be at home hits a sector consistent with the forest feeder roads before the body was found, that becomes a pivot point. They also request SMS and call detail records for context, rings, attempts, and message timestamps. Content is not the goal here. Movement is. Fuel and retail checks run in parallel. The team compiles payment events at stations within a short drive of the wood for the 72 hours around the disappearance report. They don't need a smoking gun purchase. A small buy at an odd hour can matter if it lines up with a vehicle on camera. Receipts that show cash are not invisible. They generate a time and a location, and sometimes a security clip behind the register. By the second pass, the model starts to harden. The expected run window is cross-checked against cameras that would likely see a jogger at outbound and inbound points. The absence of a runner at both endpoints is not proof. It's a pattern. Combine that with a vehicle that leaves the neighborhood during the same early window and is later seen near the forest roads, and the file begins to converge. The team is careful not to overstate anything. They write it exactly as it sits. No image of a runner on cameras X and Y during AB. Vehicle consistent with make, model class, appears on road Z at T1 and again at T2. Inside interviews, timing questions get tighter. What time did you wake is replaced by which device did you touch first and what did you open? When did you leave? Shifts to which route did you take and why that route? Investigators use the timeline, not memory, to test answers. If a stated departure time puts a person passing a camera that never recorded them, the inconsistency is logged, not argued. If a claimed location conflicts with a device that registered on a different tower, the record takes priority. The medical examiner's early estimate of time of death is folded into the clock, bounded with a range. That range informs travel windows. A short travel window requires proximity or planning. A longer window widens the net, but still must respect fuel, camera, and device data. The point is not to prove motive. The point is to remove impossible versions of events. At this stage, the case remains formally open. Publicly, France is seeing vigils and family appeals. Privately, investigators are writing a file that can survive court. Which minutes are documented, which are gaps, and which statements cannot coexist with the physical and digital record. There's a human cost to this kind of work. Families want certainty. The method requires patience. In towns like this, cases get solved not by speeches, but by minutes that finally line up. The resulting action items are clear. Re-interview key witnesses with the model in front of them. Expand the vehicle pattern match to the next ring of roads leading to Bois de la Vaivre. Complete the tower analysis for devices that may have traveled with the car. And link any retail time points to nearby cameras, no matter how minor. The data align too cleanly in a few places. That can mean a period was staged, or simply that the right column hasn't been filled yet. Before we move on, one respectful reminder. A timeline is about a person who didn't get to come home. The precision is not bureaucracy. It is accountability for the victim, Alexia Duval, and for a community that changed its habits the day the forest gave up its record. Nothing in this case moves until the clock does. After securing the forest and opening the lab work, investigators rebuild the morning of October 28, 2017, minute by minute, then weld that model to the 48 hours that followed. It's not theory. It's device logs, camera time codes, utility pings, and receipts. Each entry sourced, each gap acknowledged. When the model stands, interviews resume with the timeline on the table. The first pass stays inside the home. Power draw shows when kitchen appliances came alive. The router log confirms which devices tried to handshake and when. The victim's phone behavior is pinned, alarm history, screen wakes, and whether it left Wi-Fi. If a jog began as reported, a clean handoff from home network to cellular should appear within a specific window. If the phone remained in the residence, the absence of transition is not an accusation, but it is a fact, and facts narrow choices. That detail is locked into the first 5 minutes of the model. Outside, cameras fill the next column. Rural Haute Zone isn't blank. There are municipal lenses at traffic islands, shop fronts facing feeder roads, and forecourt cameras at service stations. Each file is hashed to preserve integrity. Investigators run a controlled drive at the same hour with a car-mounted timecode to test which lenses should have seen a runner or a vehicle leaving the neighborhood. When a camera yields nothing, that's not empty. It proves where a person or car did not pass in that window. Those negatives tighten the roots. Vehicles become the hinge. The family car and other cars tied to close contacts are charted by make, body profile, and consistent markings rather than plates alone. One candidate appears near a spur road that feeds the Bois de la Vaivre sector at a time that matters. The same profile reappears later on a different approach, suggesting a loop rather than a dead-end drive. That's flagged for escalation, not conclusion. The model absorbs it, then looks for corroboration. Telecom adds range. Tower sectors in rural France cover widely, but timing still discriminates. If a device associated with the residence pings in a sector consistent with forest access roads before Discovery Day, that narrows possibilities. Investigators request call detail records for the inner circle. No content, just attempts and durations, to see if a claimed errand overlaps a call that couldn't have connected from the location described. The goal is not to catch a witness. The goal is to eliminate versions of the morning that cannot physically exist. Retail completes the pass. Payment events within a short radius of the wood, especially off-hour fuel buys, are mapped to cameras and the drive time study. A cash receipt at an odd time is still time and place, and many counters carry a lens. When a transaction timestamp lines up with the vehicle candidate near the spur road, the board changes again. A single point proves little. Aligned points change risk. With the frame stable, interviews restart. General prompts become exact references. At 071X, which device did you pick up? Which route did you take to reach this location, and which turn did you make at the roundabout? What stopped you from returning by the same road? Each answer is tested against the model, camera views, tower timings, and the ME's early window for time of death. Inconsistent answers aren't arguments in the room, they're entries on the page. That discipline protects the case as much as it pressures the story. One sequence draws attention. A stated departure time places a subject in front of a camera that shows no one. A later claim about a fuel stop intersects a transaction that exists, but the timing pushes the route into a sprint that is hard to reconcile with human behavior and the developing medical estimate. Investigators don't label it deception, they label it impossible without cutting corners that the rest of the record doesn't support. The model holds, the story bends. Back at the lab, the forest samples begin returning. Soil cores from the burn site carry residues consistent with a small volume, short-duration pour, not a sustained fire. Branch fragments collected from the concealment weave show fresh fracture surfaces, suggesting they were snapped locally rather than gathered from the ground. Those confirmations don't replace the timeline, they reinforce it. A short fire implies limited time on scene. Fresh breaks imply quick, on-site assembly. Both favor a narrow window, not a roaming offender. Through this phase, the family's public posture remains dignified. Vigils, photos, statements of hope and grief. Inside the investigation, posture doesn't drive priorities. The file prefers measurable things. The moment a phone stayed behind, the minute a car profile showed up on a spur road, the ring time on a call that couldn't have connected where the speaker claimed to be. This is where difficult cases usually turn. Not with a confession, but when competing narratives run out of physics. There's a human line here worth holding. Precision is not coldness, it's respect for a person who didn't get to come home. When a model rules out an account, it's not because investigators lack empathy. It's because empathy can't place a car on a road it never took. In that clarity, families on all sides eventually find firmer ground than rumor can ever offer. By the end of this cycle, the team drafts action items that point to the next legal step. Lock the vehicle sightings with a second independent signature. Complete the tower analysis for overlapping devices on the forest approach, and schedule a custodial interview with the timeline in hand. The file now supports more than suspicion. It supports questions that demand precise answers. When the model is stable, French procedure allows the next step: garde à vue, custody for questioning under judicial oversight. In the last days of January 2018, investigators bring in a primary subject tied by proximity, timeline conflicts, and vehicle movement. Counsel is present. The interview room is neutral, no theatrics, no raised voices. What changes isn't tone, it's the evidence on the table. The team doesn't argue feelings. They walk the subject through the minute-by-minute clock they built, the phone that never transitioned from home Wi-Fi, the vehicle profiles seen near feeder roads to Bois de la Vaivre, the receipt timestamps that compress travel in a way ordinary errands don't. Each item is sourced, each gap is labeled. They ask for help reconciling these facts with earlier statements. Silence, then short answers. Details shift. The room stays steady. France is not an instant confession system. The judiciary expects a record that will survive the huge instruction and a trial in Vesoul. So agents pace the disclosures. They confirm the domestic context, the timing pressure, the absence of a runner on cameras where one should have appeared, and the short window that matches the medical examiner's early range. Eventually, the subject admits causing Alexia Duval's death. He frames it as a struggle that went too far, not a planned killing. It is the first full pivot in the case. The statement is taken carefully. The subject describes a confrontation inside the home, loss of control, then actions after death meant to hide what happened. He does not provide a full burn narrative here. That admission will come later during reconstruction. For now, the account ends with transport and concealment. Investigators note where the statement aligns with the model and where it does not. They do not let a confession replace forensics. They let it sit alongside them. Outside, the optics are still that of a grieving spouse who marched in white with the town. Inside, the legal posture changes. The subject, Jonathan Duval, is placed under formal investigation, mise en examen, for homicide and remanded to custody. The file transitions from probable cause to chargeable case. The task list doesn't shrink. It gets sharper. Verify transport routes with residue and trace. Rerun drive time using the subject's stated path. Compare micro debris from the forest to textiles and the interior of the vehicle. A statement is a lead, not a verdict. For audiences who follow American cases, the closest analog is the moment when a DA sees enough to file while labs are still pending. The discipline is the same. Fix what is known, test what is claimed, and refuse to overcredit a narrative because it fits a headline. The value of this confession is that it accepts responsibility and anchors the next round of tests. Its limitation is that it is self-serving on motive and scope. Good files account for both realities. The human line remains constant. A family is looking at the worst day of their lives written on paper. A community that searched the hedgerows must now reframe what they saw on the podiums and in the streets. Accountability serves everyone here. It names what happened and prevents rumor from doing the job evidence was built to do. Confessions don't end cases, they start a new phase. Months after admitting responsibility for the death of Alexia Duval, the same subject reverses course. Through counsel and then in statements, he claims a family cover-up, an argument that shifts fatal acts onto Gregory Gay, his brother-in-law. It's the kind of pivot that can fracture a town and derail public trust if it isn't tested fast and clean. Investigators do exactly that. They build a separate lane in the file and run the claim to ground. The retraction names a new setting, a new sequence, and a new principal actor. The team does not debate emotion or motive. They isolate verifiable parts: who was physically where, which devices moved, whose cars traveled, and what the forest and the home can still say under re-examination. Any allegation that big must cross the same checkpoints that produced the first confession, they start with availability. On the date and window the subject now designates, Gay's presence is mapped by work logs, personal devices, and third-party witnesses. Those time points are pinned to minutes. The inquiry widens to his vehicle, origin, route options, and any camera sightings. A consistent presence in another location during the critical window isn't an opinion. It's an exclusion. Where cameras are absent, the team leans on telecom sectors and independent contacts who can place him with specificity. Several do. The news story begins to strain against the record. Inside the home, examiners return to contact points the original confession implied: walls, door frames, soft furnishings. Swabs and tape lift samples already collected are reinterpreted under the new allegation. If a third party handled the victim or staged transport, trace should show up somewhere it didn't before. Fiber crossovers inconsistent with the household, touch DNA on hardware, transfer inside the car, not tied to the resident profile. And nothing new appears that can carry Gay into the handling chain. What does appear is consistent with the initial account: domestic contact, rapid concealment, short time on scene at the wood. The forest is also revisited. Branch fragments from the concealment weave were cataloged in Part 2. If the brother-in-law took part, his footwear, tool use, or transport path might leave a distinct marker. Analysts compare footwear exemplars and treadwear. No match emerges to Gay. Soil residues on his shoes and vehicle from controlled samples do not line up with the burn site matrix. Contamination controls hold. Scene logic still fits a single mover with limited time. Investigators interrogate the new timeline the same way they built the first. Camera pulls across approach and exit routes, tower handoffs for devices in the family orbit, and retail points that could place Gay near a car or a fuel source. Again, there's no alignment. The only path that aligns with fixed times and lab results remains the original one: short window, direct access, concealment burn, exit. The retraction reads like pressure management, not like a discovered truth. Legally, this matters for two reasons. First, the homicide file has to be proof against defense attacks that claim incomplete testing. By building an entire documented lane for the accusation and closing it with evidence, the case earns resilience. Second, French law treats slanderous denunciation as its own offense. If the allegation against Gay is knowingly false, it lives in a separate legal branch that does not alter the homicide facts. That separation is protective of the accused, of the process, and of the victim's family, who should not have to defend themselves inside their grief. The interviews reflect that discipline. Investigators don't bait reactions, they request specifics: rooms, times, actions, tools. When answers drift into generalities, they are brought back to verifiables: which door, which car, which route, which item was touched. The more the story requires unobserved movements and silent camera lines, the less it survives the paper trail. The file's strength is the same as before: measurable minutes paired with physical effects in the home, the car, and the forest. For those watching closely, this is the moment that tests whether a case is built on confession alone or on evidence that can carry weight regardless of who is talking. Here the work holds. The retraction is logged, its claims are tested, and its core is rejected by the record. The homicide track stays where it was after January 2018. Jonathan Duvall as the actor, concealment behaviors after the fact, and a forest scene that matches limited time and a focused purpose. A quick word on value. Detours like this are painful, but transparent testing protects everyone. When an accusation fails, the file shows why. And in that public clarity spares the wrongly accused, keeps the community from splitting along rumor, and keeps the focus on the person whose life was taken. Reconstruction isn't theater, it's measurement under judicial control. In 2019, with the forest work complete and the retraction formally disproven, investigators returned to the sequence after death. Under supervision, the subject walks through his own account. He confirms transport to Bois de la Vaivre and, crucially, admits setting a short fire to hide the body. The statement is recorded, timed, and compared line by line against what the site and lab already showed: a brief burn, limited heat, quick concealment with nearby branches. Technicians keep the scope narrow. They test travel time from the residence to the wood using the route he now names, repeat it at the same hour, and document pauses. The earlier drive study estimated a short window. The reconstruction fits within that window without requiring unrealistic speeds or gaps. That alignment matters. It turns a confession into a sequence that can be demonstrated. Lab results arrive in parallel. Soil cores taken beneath and around the burn area show residues consistent with a small volume pour. Depth of charring on branch tips confirms short duration, enough to mar identification, not enough to destroy remains. No wide scorch field, no long burn signature. The weave of snapped branches laid over the body carries fresh fracture faces, matching nearby limbs. This is staging with materials at hand, not a pre-planned disposal with tools and time. Inside the vehicle, trace work focuses on what a post-mortem transport typically leaves. Micro-debris consistent with the victim's textiles, soot-adjacent particulates and crevices, and any transfer that can join car to forest. The team already had baseline samples. After the admission, they compare again with the new route and handling steps in mind. Where the confession names a contact point, analysts check that area. The findings don't try to exceed what the environment can prove. They only need to be coherent with the admission and the scene. The medical examiner's conclusions are locked. Manual strangulation is lethal mechanism. Burning after death is concealment. Reconstruction closes the gap between those endpoints. It explains why the fire pattern was shallow and why the concealment net looked rushed. It also explains the absence of long-duration signatures. There was no time and there was no attempt to sustain ignition. In procedural terms, the mechanism is now complete. Homicide in the home, rapid transport, short burn to obstruct, branch cover to delay discovery, exit. Legally, this has two effects. First, it neutralizes defense arguments that the burn and concealment were conjecture. They are now admitted and measured. Second, it stabilizes the timeline for court. The same minutes that contradicted earlier statements now anchor a route, a stop, and a return. For the juged instruction and later the assize court in Vesoul that reduces trial noise. Fewer hypotheticals, more verifiable steps. There's a human dimension that deserves one line. Families want answers that don't shift. Admissions in reconstruction are difficult to hear, but they prevent rumor from rewriting what evidence already showed. Method is a form of respect. It fixes what happened so grief doesn't have to carry the uncertainty. By the end of this phase, the file reads the same from three directions: scene, lab, and statement. The forest's record, the lab's chemistry, and the subject's words now point to the same short, deliberate staging. What remains is presentation, a clear narrative that a jury can follow without expert gloss. The case is prepared for Vesoul, November 2020. The case arrives in open court exactly as it was built. A disappearance reported on October 28, 2017. Recovery of remains 2 days later in the Bois de la Vaivre. A timeline that held under every retest. A confession in January 2018. A brief detour that accused a relative and failed factual review. And a 2019 reconstruction in which Jonathan Duval admitted transporting his wife, Alexia Duval, 29, to the forest and setting a short fire to hide what he had done. There's no flourish in the presentation, just a sequence the jury can see and measure. Prosecutors start with the clock. Device activity, camera windows, vehicle movement, tower sectors, receipts. Each entry is tied to a minute or a place. Each earlier inconsistency is shown against those anchors. The medical examiner confirms manual strangulation and burning after death. Lab analysts keep it plain. Shallow charring, residues consistent with a small volume pour, fresh branch fractures from nearby limbs, evidence of a quick concealment, not a long burn. The reconstruction admission then locks the route and the handling steps to the same narrow window the timeline predicted. The defense leans on minimization, an argument that a struggle spiraled out of control and that concealment reflects panic, not intent. The court brings the discussion back to verifiables. Whether or not panic explains behavior, behavior still maps to minutes, roads, and contact points that only one person controlled. The failed family plot allegation is addressed with the same discipline. Independent witnesses, device movement, vehicle checks, and scene trace exclusions never place the brother-in-law in the chain of handling. That lane in the file closes where it should, on paper, not by opinion. Impact statements are brief and dignified. They don't try the case, they remind everyone that the person in the file had a life outside this record. The jury receives instructions and deliberates. The verdict matches the evidence they've just seen, guilty, and a 25-year sentence for Jonathan Duval. There is one ending to this story. The discovery site remains the Bois de la Vaivre near Esmoulins. The mechanism remains strangulation followed by a short post-mortem burn. The jurisdiction remains France, Gray-la-Ville, and Vesoul. As of September 27, 2025, the sentence stands and incarceration continues. Separate proceedings related to the false accusation do not change the homicide judgment. A final note kept short: community compassion matters, so does method. Vigils can hold a family together, but only evidence can carry them to clarity. In this case, the grid searches, the timeline, the chemistry, and the defendant's own words aligned cleanly enough that rumor had nowhere left to stand. That is justice doing what it's supposed to do, quietly, precisely, and in the open. I'll leave you with this. Evidence, not optics, keeps families from living in doubt. When timelines, small choices, and quiet patterns don't add up, speak up early. Check on your people. Believe behavior, not performance. If this story moved you, tell me. What warning signs would you push your community to recognize, and what safeguards would you support where you live? Drop a comment, share where you're watching from or why this didn't work for you. And if you want more cases told with care and clarity, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story.